What's going on, guys? Welcome to Garage 23, and today we are converting the S14 from 4 lug to 5 lug. I know, exhilarating. Let's go. A 5 lug conversion is one of those modes that seemingly has no performance value and could be argued that it's purely aesthetic. It mainly makes the car seem like it's a higher spec than it was originally, as 4 lug was typically found on lower trim levels, such as our example here. The main reasons for us is that this will not only give us a larger selection of wheels, but also a better selection of brakes. We would be able to upgrade to 300ZX calipers, Akabonos, or even Brembo calipers, as these were found on other 5 lug Nissan cars. Alright, so we got the hubs off, and as you can see, these are the 4 lug ones. There are kits available that are just like factory replacements for the 5 lug conversion. We want to try and do this cheap though, and one thing that I remember from the old yonder days of forums and actual in-person gatherings was a couple of friends had mentioned that you could use hubs from an Infiniti J30 or Q45, but it had to be a later model one. And I never looked into it that much, because every time I would try and look for one, it was always like the older ones that were at the junkyard. But one of the last times that we went to the junkyard, I found a 97 Infiniti J30, and I took the hubs off of that. And they do look like they can be made to work. So they're not exactly a direct swap, but these were 30 bucks. So definitely a lot cheaper than the $200–300 kits that are available online. But the main issue with these is they're not a sealed bearing. And also the bearing itself is about 10 millimeters too shallow compared to the S14 one. So I was gonna have our friend Dan make up a nice machined little spacer to make up that difference, but I know most of you guys probably don't have a convenient machinist friend with thousands of dollars of equipment. So I actually came up with another idea, and that was just to get a piece of pipe that was a 1/4 inch thickness and then just cut a 10 millimeter section out of that. This is a 2 inch. So yeah, 2 inch pipe with a 1.5 inch inner diameter and 1/4 inch wall thickness. And that should give us enough room to clear the knuckle, and it should space it out the appropriate amount to let us bolt it on. So the main issue with the older Q45s and J30s was that the diameter of the hub itself wasn't the same. So you couldn't physically even put it on. Whereas these ones, they are the right diameter. See, so it'll go on there. But this seal at the back, this doesn't work with our S14 knuckle. So I could fix this by, again, having our friend Dan machine this down to the diameter that would work with this seal, but we can't really come back from something like that. And yeah, it's just, that's just kind of a pain. I don't really want to go that way. I'm probably just gonna run it without the seals for now, unless I can find a different seal that's gonna work with that diameter on the knuckle. But for now, we're just gonna try it without the seals and see how long it lasts. Another thing I want to try is to see if I can press out the bearing from the S14 hub and try and press it into this. I'm not sure how those even come apart. It looks like it's all built in as one piece, but if you look up bearing replacements for S14s online, you can see the bearing that they sell you. So I figure it should be replaceable, but I've never tried to press a bearing out of one of these. So I guess we can find out. But for now, yeah, that's the main issue without the seal, is that the bearing kind of comes apart. But So then our spacer is gonna go in there. And then this slotted washer, which I kind of messed up. So just line up your slotted washer here. All right, so before we close this back up, we need to punch in these, the edge of the nut, I guess, onto these flat spots on the knuckle. That's just to kind of lock it in place so it doesn't back out and your wheel doesn't come flying off on the freeway and hit somebody.
What the?
So yeah. Now you can put the cover back on. And we're good to go. So obviously we can't put our stock brakes back on because, you know, 5 is more than 4. If you wanted to do this like extra budget, you could drill out another hole, actually like 4 more holes. Yeah, 3, 4 more holes in this one. You do that by getting, I guess, another rotor, preferably one with the same hub diameter, and lining them up to where you get at least one of the studs to line up. And then you'd put a bolt through that, and then you'd mark the other 4 and drill those out. Rotors are kind of a pain in the ass to drill through, so good luck with that if that's the route you want to take. It's doable, but we already had these laying around, so I'm just going to try and use these. The calipers and rotors are from a 95 Nissan Maxima. I picked these up for the Altima a while ago when we started doing drag racing with it, just because I wanted to try and get a 15-inch rim on it and get some bigger tires, the more sidewall, but that didn't end up working out because the brake master cylinder is too big, and with these calipers on there, it just felt really sketchy because there's a lot of brake pressure that you need to apply with your like actual foot, and that pressure wasn't really getting translated to the calipers, so it didn't feel like you were stopping quick enough, and it felt very scary. So anyway, we're gonna try and use these here, but I would like to not have to bleed the brakes if I don't have to. So what I want to try and do is see if I can take the bracket off of these calipers and see if it's the same bolt pattern as that caliper, and hopefully that'll let us use this rotor, because this rotor is a little bit bigger than the stock S14 rotor. Yeah, go figure, Maxima has better brakes than a 240. But first, let's take this caliper apart. That'll work. And then this one. And of course that's not gonna work. Yeah, so these brakes are just all around bigger. So it looks like we're gonna have to bleed the brakes. Okay, so that didn't go as planned. When I went to tighten the caliper and everything together, the rotor was binding up against the caliper bracket. So with everything tightened, it wouldn't even spin. And I didn't understand why, because I thought I had everything measured properly, but surprise, surprise, I did not. So initially I had just measured the thickness of the bearing itself. So I measured from this surface to this surface, and from that surface to that surface. And that's a 10 millimeter difference. So I was like, okay, cool. Just make up the 10 millimeters, bam, call it a day. That is not the solution because it's not actually just 10 millimeters, it's 5 millimeters on each side. So that's why when we had the 10 millimeter spacer on the front of the bearing, it was pushing the whole hub back 5 millimeters, basically pushing it into the caliper bracket. So that's not gonna work. And we don't have access to the saw to cut more of these because that's at John's house and he's like 45 minutes to an hour that way. So we're about to just cancel this video and just call it a day and give up. But I thought of something else. So I have a bunch of these extra little washers that come on the front of the hub stock. And these happen to be just about 5 millimeters. They're like 5.4 to 5.6 millimeters thick. So these would be perfect. And I think I have enough of them that we could just stack them. The only thing is that they're slotted so that they lock into place on the front of the hub, on the knuckle. So we're gonna have to grind these flat spots out and make them just like a normal washer basically. So then we can put one on the back, one on the front, and then keep the stock one to lock onto the knuckle, and that should work. So let's give that a shot. All right, we got both of the washers ground out, and they're pretty circular. Close enough anyway, so let's try this one more time. All right, one of the washers I had to put like a bevel on one of the edges because the shank on the knuckle isn't a straight cut, which I should add, this is good design by Nissan because if you had a straight edge here, that would be a stress point and could potentially snap off. The fact that it's radius is pretty nice. Anyway, so that bevel that I put goes toward that side. Now we can put the hub back on. Then the second washer. And then the third washer. This is the least sketchy way of doing this, I swear. And this can go back on. And here's my impact. All right, before I crimp that down again, let's just check and make sure this is gonna work. All right, that is significantly better. At least it spins. It's still not perfectly centered, but there's space between the caliper bracket at least, so it'll work. I think the fact that it's not perfectly centered is just because those, like I said, those washers aren't exactly 5 millimeters thick. They vary from 5.4 to 5.6. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it transfers to the rotor not being perfectly centered. Luckily, these are sliding calipers, so not a huge deal. The caliper will make up the difference, it doesn't care. So now we can crimp the lock nut, put the cover back on, and bleed this brake, I guess. Be the next thing to do. Then we could show you the new wheels we got. Okay, got everything bolted up. Now we just got to switch the brake line from the old caliper to the new caliper. This is just going to be messy. There's no other way to, there's no way around this. But one thing you can do is get some like needle nose vice grips and put some like hose over the vice grips themselves and use that to like pinch the brake line closed basically, so all the brake fluid doesn't leak out. I'm not gonna do that just because these brake lines don't feel all that rubbery anymore. They're kind of old, so doing something like that could potentially compromise them. So I only suggest that if it's like a fairly new car. In this case, I'm just gonna loosen this and try to do this as quickly as possible. So let's see how big of a mess I can make. All right, not too bad.
Okay.
So to bleed the brakes, it's easier if you have some kind of clear tubing container thingy that's not full of dog hair. I literally bought this, I think, like in high school, and been using it ever since. You can tell how like heat cycled this has been, that it's like rigid. But if you just have some clear hose, you can like clamp over the bleeder screw, but these work pretty well too. And then the bottle is magnetic. Now we just need somebody to pump the brakes. There you can see all the bubbles going through the line. Again. So you just want to repeat this until there's little to no air bubbles coming through in the line. Just basically have the other person pump the brakes at least 3 times and then hold on the last pump. And then while they're holding, you open the bleeder to let all that all that pressure bleed out, and then you close it again and then have them repeat again. All right, that's pretty much gonna be it. There's pretty much no air bubbles in that last pump. So now we can put our wheels on. All right. All right. En serio, no manches. All right, so they rub on the coilover, but you get the idea. Yeah, nothing special, just some stock 300ZX wheels. We just needed some 5-load wheels to put on this. And yeah, our buddy Jordan hooked us up with these pretty cheap, so that's what we're gonna go with. But it looks like we need some spacers. All right, I think that looks slightly better. So yeah, these are more or less only temporary until we figure out what we're gonna do with this car, really. But yeah, I think it looks better than the stock base model wheels, at least. So I think we're gonna cut it here for today for the sake of not keeping your significant other waiting. But we're gonna pick it up next week with the rear, because that's a little bit more involved. We gotta take the whole rear suspension apart, the knuckles and everything. Probably gonna end up sandblasting them and cleaning them up a bit because they're pretty dirty. And we also gotta replace the e-brake cables, and that's just a whole lot of mess I don't wanna deal with right now. So that's gonna be it. Thanks guys, see you next time.
できなかった人はちゃんと復習するようにね。